There's one that's told in the perspective of a knife that stabs a guy in like the first chapter of like the original book, and you're just like, who comes up with this stuff? Hello everyone, welcome to Sound and Fury Book Reviews. As usual, I am Tina. So today is my wrap up for May. So first of all, May has been a really good month for me in terms of writing and reading. I finished the second major edit of my space opera trilogy, which is very exciting. I've lined up an amazing editor and an affordable proofreader, which is great. And my cover is back. And on my birthday, July 8th, I'm going to be doing a cover reveal video and I'm going to talk about my book. So if you're interested in that, you can wait in anticipation for July 8th, but let me tell you, the cover is fantastic. I read 11 books in in May. What is going on? 11? Did I fall into a vortex? Did I gain some free time? So I'm gonna actually bump one of these books to talk about next month because, geez, what the heck. I also think I'm gonna be reading some long books this month, so I might not have as much time. The first book that I read was called Ezra Slef, and it's by Andrew K. I've edited this out, but I tried like 4 times to pronounce his last name, and I apologize, and I'm sorry. I cannot pronounce that. I can't pronounce anything, and I feel really bad. Anyway, I got this from Whispering Stories, where I'm a guest reviewer at times. It's a literary satire from earlier this year. I can't figure out if it was self-published or done through an indie company, but either way, it's an indie book. The cover, it's okay. I'm not really sure what else could be on there, so I guess it's fine. This book caught me absolutely by surprise. I wasn't sure what I was getting into when I selected this novel to review, but something kind of called me to it, and I'm very thankful I did because this book is an absolute delight. It's a novel. The novel is like a story within a story. So we have this guy named Humbert Botkin. He's a professor of literature. He's writing a biography about his hero, this fictional literary giant named Ezra Slef. But rather than the story actually be about Ezra, it's an autobiography of Bodkin in like almost like a journal style. It's very interesting. It's pretty much funny from the first page. I mean, it's a particular kind of humor. It's a mishmash between satire and absurdity and irony, which is like what I really like. And I was bemused throughout the entire thing while also laughing out loud quite a few times. The best thing about the novel is how the author manages to make you enthralled in the life of this extremely, extremely unlikable character. Bodkin has this egoism that is through the roof, like it just impressively egotistical, as well as he's a complete pompous snob, and he's a bit dense too. So the thing is, though, we're invited to relish in kind of the schadenfreude that when he gets his comeuppance, I guess it's quite an interesting way to read a character. Another compelling aspect of the story is a minor character who is clearly the devil masquerading as a man, yet we're unsure what his endgame is, as he seems to only assist people. And, you know, tied to his presence is this overarching threat of revenge from a man Bodkin wrongs at the start of the novel. So I wasn't sure while reading whether these two were connected, and that's kind of part of the fun. As someone who has an English degree and has read Beckett and Joyce and most of the other postmodernist writers talked about a lot in this book, I could tell what this novel was doing, but I'm not sure how approachable it is for the average reader. The novel does poke fun at itself, and it pokes fun of people that think they're too cool for genre reads. It pokes fun of literary fiction, but a lot of the humor does come from this kind of esoteric realm. Personally, while I have, no idea who I would recommend it to, I very much enjoyed this book. I thought it was quite funny. I do wish the footnotes were at the bottom of the page and not the end of the chapter, because that was really hard to read in an ebook, but that's just, because the footnotes are really important. But that's just kind of an aside. I guess they're endnotes, not footnotes. The next book that I read was Mexican Gothic by Sylvia Moreno-Garcia. This was a Gothic mystery, and you can find this review in one of my single book reviews in my feed. So you can check out that list. That's where I store all the single book reviews. It's called Single Book Reviews. Big surprise. So the next 3 books that I read, I'm going to start this off by saying that I was obsessed with DragonLance in high school. It got me through some really tough times. You know, I really tough times being an angsty 15-year-old. But I must have read the original trilogy dozens of times. I also read and owned about 30 plus of the spin-off books. If you know anything about DragonLance, it's like there's like 9 or 12 or whatever main books, and then they have all these like little spin-off kind of side quest novels dealing with characters. And then there's a bunch of short story collections where it deals with like the most obscure thing. Like there's one that's told in the perspective of a knife that stabs a guy in like the first chapter of like the original book, and you're just like, who comes up with this stuff? Anyway, I got rid of most of them, but I have about 15. I've got the main trilogy, I got my absolute favorites, and I got any that feature these like draconian bridge builder guys because they're so funny. And these draconians are like kind of like, they're like dragon people. They were, oh my god, I'm gonna get into the mythology now. They were created by magic from the eggs of actual dragons, and these made these like demon-y kind of dragon dudes who are sapient, sentient beings. Anyway, a few years ago, like 10, maybe 6 years ago, I reread the original trilogy, and I still enjoyed it for nostalgic purposes, and because, you know, I really like them, they're fun. But I associate it so much from my teenage years, and given how many spin-offs there are, it's kind of a quantity versus quality kind of series now. Anyway, I am not a mood reader, generally, but for some reason the 3 moons, because that's how many moons there are on DragonLance, see how much I've read these books, aligned, and I was compelled by sorcery to read this Dhamon Saga. I think it's actually called, yeah, it's called the Dhamon Saga. So look at these. I've only read these once when they first came out in like 2000, so I was, yeah, 16 or 17, or 15, I guess. Yeah, exactly, the height of when I was reading DragonLance. I only read them once. I don't know why I kept them when I got rid of all my other ones. I don't know what compelled me. Anyway, 21 years later, what do I think? I'm going to get into it because I like talking about this, but in terms of a DragonLance spin-off, I'd only recommend this to hardcore DragonLance fans. If you're not a hardcore DragonLance fan, pay attention to this review because it's kind of funny because I kind of tear these books apart. But if you are a hardcore DragonLance fan, then read these before you watch this review. I will say I hate these covers. I hate them. They're so early 2000s fantasy. Like, I really enjoy the classic kind of style, and these are just absolutely wretched. I'm not impressed with them at all. The basic story of all 3 is that these novels follow this guy named Dhamon who has a dragon's scale magically implanted in his leg that causes him extreme pain once in a while. And it's spreading, you know, it's kind of a disease. As such, he has, and because of some trauma from these past books that he was part of, he's become this kind of morally bereft outlaw murderer asshole. In book 1, he's traveling with this guy who who is his friend, but he like refuses to say he has a friend, and he's traveling with this who's a wizard, and then he has this half-elf girlfriend, and he has who's a thief, and then he has this little kobold creature, which is kind of like a goblin, like whatever. If you know the mythology, you know what a kobold is. The story honestly just kind of meanders from there. The plot of the first book is nearly non-existent. Like, the whole time I was like, what is this? Anyway, the first one is called, I'm going to go through each of them because this is funny. So, the first one's called Downfall. Oh, I forgot to mention that they're by Jean Rabe. That's the author. Okay, Downfall. One of the issues with DragonLance is that to read any of the spin-off novels, you need to have read the main books. And as I said, there's like 9 or 12 of them now. I don't know. Given I was nearing the end of my DragonLance journey and in high school when the 3rd trilogy came out, I only read it once. As such, I barely remembered Dhamon and his buddies at all. That being said, you know, Rabe did a good job providing a refresher without a huge info dump. And little things came back to me as I was reading, such as like the mythology of like the different races in the book, things like that. They must have a huge file somewhere for like continuity or Wizards of the Coast or whoever publishes these now, because like, how do you keep track of all this stuff? The story, as I said, is meandering. It's all right. It's more like side quests on top of side quests, and I was okay with that. You know, a lot of the tension in the novel comes from the reader knowing a secret that only 1 or 2 characters are keeping from the others. That being said, it's not a lot of tension, but it has a bit. You know, Rabe has a good writing style. It's engaging, it's quick to digest, but there's these switches between the characters that are precipitated by absolutely nothing at all, meaning I was like, oh, we're following him now. And the point of view is 3rd person limited, but we're never giving a limited view to the women, just the men. That was kind of odd to me. I don't know why. I was just like, why don't the women get a perspective? Anyway, the fight scenes were good. The book, though, is filled with the most unlikable characters I've ever come across. Like, worse than the characters in The Goldfinch. Dhamon is a selfish, unconscionable, murdery bastard. You know, whenever his dragon scale acts up, I just hoped he would die. I was just die, man. I hate you. Anyway, I hate the way he treated his girlfriend, Callie. You know, he was just manipulative of her, and his self-serving decisions were absolutely painful to watch. Then we have this guy named Maldred, who was a hypocritical jerk and deserved his fate in the end. I couldn't stand him the whole time. I did remember the twist with him, though, and while I was reading it, I was like, oh yeah, okay. Callie was intentionally annoying, always whining and, you know, shrieking and saying lover all the time. I didn't dislike her as much as the other two because I felt bad for her because she had a hard lot in life, but they didn't make her out to be very likable. And this other guy named Rig was a moody complainer. This woman named Fiona was a cardboard cutout. And Fetch, the little kobold, was the only one who was redeemable because he was like the comic relief. In truth, the only reason I read this book was because I thought there was this badass draconian character, but he shows up in book 2. If you do intend on reading these books, skip here to avoid the spoilers, as I can't talk about book 2 and 3 without spoiling the predecessors, but I don't know how much you're interested in this. So, Betrayal. I can't tell if this is the worst cover or not. I mean, anyway, like Downfall, it's side quests upon side quests, that's all it is. This would have been completely fine to me, actually, because honestly, as I said, any book is just a side quest, really, from the main storyline. But I didn't care about any of the characters. We learned next to nothing about this newcomer named Varric, and he was extremely bland. I didn't like the implication that less makeup and more modest clothing was an improvement for Callie, or whatever her name is, though I did like that she was less annoying than in the first book. Maldred barely does anything in this novel, and I dislike him anyway, so that's fine. And Dhamon was the same self-serving asshole that he was in book 1. Yet, we have my boy Rag, Rog, or however you say his name, Rog, I guess. I knew, as I said, there was a badass draconian in the series, and he finally shows up in book 2. One issue I have with him is that she says that he's 10 feet tall, and that seems absolutely improbable to me. The ceiling of my room in here isn't even 9 feet tall. So how Rog fits into certain places later, his shoulders rubbing, because she talks about that a lot, aside, seems absolutely unclear to me. I mean, I love the Draconians, they're my favorite. So I recall a lot about them, and in my mind I'm pretty sure that he actually was more like maybe 7 feet tall with like 3 feet wings. Because the wings usually are what's included in their height in these stories. So I think that she screwed up. Anyway, height issue aside, I liked Rog because he had personality and because I love Draconians. I also like the villain, Nura Bint Drax. She's a cool name. The previous book didn't have an antagonist at all, so it was nice that this one actually had something to tie everything together. I wish we got more scenes with her, though, because the ones we get with her are interesting. The writing in this book was less jumpy because we tend to stick to Damon's kind of third-person limited most of the time, and the fight scenes were well described like last time. It's more engaging of a novel than the previous book, but there were some continuity questions I had, such as like, how, not why, but how the knights made it to the ships and how Rog escaped one situation. You know, but Rabe has these kind of inventive and super cool locations and situations that made it a lot better than the first one. The best part of the novel is the section with the sorceress, as that went in a completely different direction than I expected, and Dhamon was passed out for all of it. So yeah, it's basically just, I wish these books were just about Rog, really, like honestly. And the last book, Redemption. See, he's not 10 feet tall. He's totally not 10 feet tall if you go by these shitty covers. This is the best book of the trilogy, quite frankly. With the first one, I was reading it just to get through it. And the second one was more engaging because I'm a boy Rog. But this one I was actually quite into. This is definitely because Damon's redemption arc. I mean, not entirely sure what causes him to start caring about people again, but when he starts fighting for others and not just for himself, the story becomes more worthwhile on an empathetic level. Because he cares, we care, or at least we don't hate him anymore. The story moves quickly, but like the other books, you know, Rabe is really good at these extended scenes that are basically side quests. The Goblin Army part was really fun. I really liked what happened with Dhamon at the end with the scale. Like, those things were really interesting. Rog is pretty much a main character in this book too, which was nice because, you know, I love him. He's not very deep, but he's interesting. There's one thing I'm at odds with, and well, I'm at odds with a lot of things, but one thing that I actually didn't like a lot was Fiona's madness, because it's such a cliche and dated way to approach mental illness. I understand it has plot relevance in a few places, and it's not like these books are intended as a psychological analysis, but I was not fond of the depiction. Fiona, despite this, never gets interesting, unfortunately, and she's just like there. Maldred, the ogre guy, fades into the background in the novel, which is fine. I mean, he sucks anyway. The novel, though, you know, it's fun, it's easy to digest, it's got some interesting creatures and settings. There's a manticore. If I did ever read this series again, I would definitely only read book 3. So these 2 books can go in my pile of books on my floor, pile of books to give to a used bookstore because I have a pile, but we're still in lockdown, so I've got this like 2 Pampers boxes full of books to take to trade in so I can get some classic sci-fi. So in terms of a series, I give the books like a 2.5 out of 5. I give book 3 a 3 out of 5. Book 2 and book 1 get a 2 out of 5. I recommend it to people that are hardcore DragonLance readers, and that's it. Anyway, that was long. I hope you enjoyed that. The next book that I read was A Diary in the Age of Water by Nina Monteau, which is a eco-fiction from 2020. You can check out my single book review of this in my single book reviews list. So the next book I read was A History of What Comes Next by Sylvain Neuvel, which is a science fiction from early this year. I listened to this book via audiobook on Audible, and the narration was absolutely fantastic. There's different voices for each character, and they were engaging. The actors did a fantastic job with the dialogue, and they gave the characters such personality. I felt like I was listening to a play rather than listening to a book, which I really loved. To be honest, I don't know if I would have enjoyed the book as much if I'd read it. I really loved the narrators. So I listened to this book because Scott at Book Invasion, he did a review a couple months ago, and he didn't like it, I think, as much as I did, but that's cool. I appreciate his review because it got me to listen to it. So it's a real treat for history buffs who also love sci-fi. So because it's a fun, exciting, and at times comic and or tragic, what if story. The story itself is a reinterpretation of real history in that it modifies real places, events, and people so that they were influenced by these fictional characters, Sarah and Mia, whom we quickly learn are not entirely human. They themselves aren't sure what they are, as when they get pregnant, they produce a genetic copy of themselves. Like, it's some kind of parthenogenesis, I don't know. Mia is the 100th of these women in their generational line, and she's also the 100th of them to be on the lookout for the mysterious man or entity they call the Tracker, who's been tracking them for centuries. I really enjoyed it. I love historical retellings, so I was very much into the concept behind the novel. I love the Cold War. I love World War II, so all of this stuff is in the novel. I understood what the author was trying to do, and it really worked for me. I'm also a big nerd when it comes to people doing research for their novels, and it's clear that Neuvel put a lot of thought into this one. The little flashbacks of the Kipsu in different centuries were an absolute delight. I wish we had more of those. While the book is not laugh out loud funny, it has this kind of satirical streak that I was definitely on board with. It was quite, subtly funny. Unlike other reviewers, I didn't mind the meandering plot. I think it shows how real life stories don't follow a linear plot line, that most big events are due to small decisions or minute changes. That being said, there were parts that dragged a little, and I had some questions about Mia and Sarah, if they had no connections when they keep moving around, like how are they able to get jobs or, find the data on people that they need. There's this part where Sarah explains their wealth and extortion methods, but it felt like a thrown-in explanation after the fact rather than a real explanation as to how they keep doing this. I really love, though, how Mia and Sarah are almost in the dark about their purpose as the reader is. This made their choices understandable and relatable. I also liked the relationship between Mia and Billy. It seemed realistic for the time period, but I was wondering whether Mia told Korolov about her or not. And some other things, Mia and Sarah, and in some other things, Mia and Sarah also kept us at a distance. We do see into their heads, but it's more during action scenes than during downtime. Perhaps this is because they're alien and thus inscrutable, but I wanted more introspection than the book gave me into kind of them. But overall, it was an engaging and fun look at our history and maybe, a history of what comes next. Haha, I'm so funny. I'm not sure if the print or ebook has this, but the audiobook at the end has this section at the end where the author talks about the research he did for the novel. That was really interesting. And there's an interview with the 2 main narrators, a mother and daughter voice actors, and that was really engaging. I usually don't read this kind of backmatter stuff, but I actually liked it. So the author, Sylvain Neuvel, liked my review on Goodreads. This blew my mind for some reason. I was like, what? Really? This book's been out for a while. There's lots of other reviews. I don't know why he liked mine. But, whatever. Thanks, bud. The next book I read was Tenlo by Stark Holborn. You can check out my review from last week in my feed. The next book I read was The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri, which also is in my single book reviews feed from last week. The last book that I read was The Fear of Losing Eurydice, which I'm going to be posting a review of on the 14th, along with my review of The Bone Way, as both are inspired by the same myth. One of my favorite myths, I might add. What's the book I'm going to talk about next month that I'm bumping? You'll have to wait and see, but I'll tell you, it's not going to be my top book of 2021. That's for sure.